Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 363 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is Caroline Evers-Endacott, whom we last met in episode 344, where she spoke about addiction counselling. Caroline is an integrative therapist working with common mental health presentations and has a special interest in addiction treatment. Caroline has worked with the Priory since 2020, holds a master's degree in addiction psychology and counselling, and is a registered member of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, also known as the BACP. She joins us today to discuss the latest in a series of lectures she has recorded for the CPD Library, focusing on supporting clients with addictions. This lecture is titled Alcohol, Problem Drinking and Recovery Pathways. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Evers-Endacott and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 363 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Evers-Endacott and Ken Kelly. Rory and I are walking you through three topics today, starting off with our ethical, sustainable practice, where today we're delving into choosing the right online tech. So if you're counselling or delivering a service online, how important is that tech? Then we're going to practice matters. Rory's already beautifully spoken about the interview with Caroline, speaking about alcohol, problem drinking and recovery pathways. I think this is a really important one. I think very often in counselling, we might have somebody who might speak about their drinking or the drinking of another with concern, and being prepared for that and having CPD on that really, really helpful. And then we go into student services, where today we're speaking about navigating a long gap that sometimes comes up for many between counselling training levels. You may start on a level and then want to go to the next level of that, and you might have to wait 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even 9 months before that next level starts. How do you use that time constructively in between? But starting us off, Rory, a beautiful topic that you've chosen for us today, and I think an important one, and I know one we cover in our online and telephone counselling course, and that is the right tech for online working, Rory.
Absolutely, Ken. And I noticed over the last few months, certainly in our Facebook group, and if you want to go to our Facebook group, it's Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You know where to find us by now. And lots of people showing their counselling rooms off. Beautiful chairs, lovely pictures on the wall, great decoration, nice lamps, all that type of thing. And I kind of sat and thought, beautiful, lovely, fantastic. And then I thought, I wonder if people put the same amount of care into their tech for online work. I never see anybody sharing the computer or their microphone. Now, maybe because they're very boring. You know, they're not things of beauty to look at, or certainly for a lot of people. And I think that if you're working online, we should put as much effort into considering our online room, if you like, as we would if we were working face to face. Because obviously when clients meet us, the technology we use to meet, whether it be on the phone or whether it be via a video platform, should have the same care and consideration as if a client met us in our therapy rooms, Ken.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so interesting because those first impressions last. I mean, that's maybe a trite saying, but it's also very, very true. And when we are appearing online, the frame that we sit in, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that I'm kind of putting my hands out to the frame that you would see if you were on YouTube. That's all that the client sees. That's the only reference they have of you. They can maybe see the upper part of your body and they can see what's in your background, but they're going to make a decision on that. And you're 100% right, Rory. We spend so much time thinking about what kind of an impact and what kind of a first impression our counselling room may create for a client. And do we consider that online, or are we just in a corner, maybe with a blurred background, using maybe the onboard laptop microphone and camera? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I am saying, have you considered what that looks like and feels like for a client? Now, I think there's a number of different areas that we're going to dive into today, but I'd like to kick us off by saying what is most important if you're working online, and I'm going to take video as an example here. What is most important is the same thing that would be important to you if you were sitting across from that person in a room. It is, can they see me? Can they see that I'm engaged? Can they see the facial expressions and the nuance within my being? Am I able to demonstrate my active listening? Can the person hear me? Can they hear me clearly? Can they hear the nuance? So if I speak softer, or if I take a breath, ooh, do they hear that? Or does that get lost because the microphone maybe is not there and good enough to pick that up? Because I think that would be a shame, because it's all part of who we are and how we show up for therapy. So I think it takes a little bit of consideration, and in the same way as you might invest some money in your room and go and buy a nice chair from IKEA, other brands are available, but that's where I bought mine and set up my practice. We maybe should consider, have we put that same kind of investment into our online practice? Because that's what it is. When you're online, that frame they see, that is your online practice. That is how you are holding that client. That's how you're welcoming them. That's how you are interacting with them, Rory.
Absolutely. And when you were doing your emoting there, Ken, to get the point across, listening in my headphones, it sounded literally like you're in the same room. And I think that's testament to the fact that you're using, we use for the podcast, very advanced technology, so it's very, very clear. And I think, from a first perspective of technology, I think the first thing to consider is what connects us. And what connects us is usually, certainly when you're working with clients, is either the phone signal or the internet signal, and the connection with the internet. So I think it's really important to have reliable internet or telephone connection. I think we've all been in situations, certainly in online meetings, where someone's frozen or you can't hear somebody, and it can be really, really frustrating. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about that, because when you use technology, you're putting yourself in the hands of the technology companies and the technology that sits between you and the client. But what we can do, I think, is we can make sure we have, a really good internet connection, a broadband or a fiber connection. We make sure that no one else is using it while we're using it. So, like a lot of people, my grandchildren watch online cartoons. So if I'm using the internet, nobody else uses the internet. I'm afraid no cartoons for my grandchildren when I'm working, because it takes up part of the internet connection and can slow down the connection. And also in terms of phone signal, understanding that, the phone connection is only as good as the signal. And I think if you start from those, that's really the underpinning. It's basically like your therapy room. It's the actual structure of your therapy room The connection and the connection speed is just literally like the building, isn't it, Ken?
Yeah, and it does go down. It goes down because it is technology and it is fallible. I mean, we cover all of this in our online and telephone counselling course, and what you might do and what you might have in place if technology fails. And you said, Rory, you can't 100% stop that from happening. However, you can mitigate. And this is what's important. We control the controllables. So for us as the therapist, if there's going to be a break in that connection, we want to do as much as we can to make sure it's not us that is breaking that connection. Now, I live in North Wales, and we're pretty rural here. I live in the middle of a field, and it's snowing today, just out of interest. I don't know when you're listening to this, but right now it's freezing and it's snowing here in North Wales. And every time we have heavy wind gusts, it takes down phone lines and it takes down connection. So I had to think very, very carefully of what I might use for that. And I chose to go for Mr. Elon Musk's internet, which is basically satellite transmitted, which is more expensive, but it is reliable. And because I live in a vulnerable area where we have a lot of heavy weather and we're exposed to those elements, it's worth me paying that amount of money, because I would pay money to hire a room anyway, or a professional setting. And I see it as part of the professional setting that I need for my work. And of course, when I was in practice, the same was true. You don't necessarily need to now put a whole lot of money into your infrastructure and connection, but you can do simple things like, if you have a router, don't use wireless. Take a cord and connect it to your router so you've got the strongest possible connection that you can have for the connection that you have available. So I think, yes, it's a great place to start is the infrastructure, or what you are transmitting on. And then secondly, you mentioned, Rory, that you could hear me and you can see me. And if you're on watching a podcast on YouTube, you'll certainly see me. However, this is not how I would show up for a client. Even though this technology is very good, this technology is built for making podcasts. And because of that, I've got if you're not watching this, I'll describe it for you. I have in front of me a massive microphone. It really is big. It takes up, it covers over my face. It almost covers over my mouth. And I use this because we're making a podcast, and it is generally an audio consumed podcast, unless you're watching on YouTube. But it makes sense on YouTube because it is a podcast. However, I wouldn't meet with a client with a massive microphone between me and them. I would wonder what message that might put over. Would that be a blockage between me and them? And there are other ways to make sure that you get good sound without having a massive podcasting microphone in front of your mouth when you're speaking to a client. So just a good quality mic, either on board on your laptop or your computer, or you can buy little accessories that you can clip in that really, really do make a great difference to the sound, but they're not seen. They sit out of the shot. So it's certainly what I might use if I was to step back into practice. And I think the same is true for headphones. There are different kinds of headphones, and we'll get onto audio in a moment. I know this is one of your specialist areas, Rory, so we will definitely kick this over to you. But with headphones, they can send a message. You're using tech, it can send a message. And that might be a reassuring message. If I was wearing headphones that was covering over both of my ears, as Rory is, so if you're watching this, you'll see Rory is there waving and smiling and pointing at his headphones. It may say to that client, this is confidential. You are only in my ear. In the first session, I may even say, I wear these headphones so that I can hear you clearly, I can hear the nuance in your voice, and that everything that you say is confidential because it goes directly into my ears. But Rory, there's more than one flavor, I guess, of headphone, is there not?
Yes. So for those of you who watch the podcast on YouTube, or have seen the clips, that the little video stills that we put onto our Facebook group or our social media, you'll see that I wear a pair of studio headphones. And the reason for that is that as I'm getting older, my hearing is starting to fail just a little bit. So I've invested in quite an expensive pair of headphones, and also they're closed back. In other words, when I put them on, all I can hear really is Ken's wonderful voice. I can't hear anything that goes on around me, and that means that I'm kind of enclosed in the world of the speaker. So when the person speaking to me, really all I can hear is what Ken is saying. And early on, when Ken was kind of emoting about good quality audio, it really did feel like he was sat in the same room as me. It was quite spooky, to be honest with you. It literally did feel like he was sitting next to me. So you can have a closed back pair of headphones like I wear, but some people don't like closed back headphones. They made me feel a bit uncomfortable or a bit constricting. So you can buy lightweight headphones. You can buy headphones that sit in the ear. They just clip in the ear, and people can't really see them. Some of them have a wire. Ken uses ear pods, which are connected by Bluetooth. You can use those. And you can buy something called jaw headphones, which fit over your shoulders, and you could hear through them. Not many people use them, but they just kind of sit on your shoulder and you can hear through them. So I think when it comes to headphones, it's really about trying to find the best one that fits for you. And with any technology, try it out with a peer first before you use it with client. Try it out with a peer.
Oh, we have so much fun in our online and telephone counselling course, because we actually part of the course is peer working, where you're going to meet up with a peer and you're going to say, hey, how does my sound? How do I look? How does my frame look? Is my eye at your eye level? These are all basic things that we don't think about when we're in a face-to-face setting, but they certainly play out when we are working online. You know, you want your eye level to align with your client's eye level. So the same, to simulate that, being in the room and looking at them directly. And it's very easy to lose eye contact when you're working online. And losing eye contact is, we've been taught that in society, if somebody doesn't hold eye contact with us, maybe they're not interested. Maybe they're looking at something else or thinking something else. And we don't want to be projecting that message to our clients. We want to be saying, I am here, I'm listening to you. But at the same time, I guess we don't want to be looking like we're frozen and staring them right in the eyes. So knowing how to use your camera effectively, I think is important. Knowing where your camera is on your screen and using it effectively. I'm going to give you one of the little tips that is in our online telephone counselling course for using your camera. So at the moment, the camera that I'm using is an external camera to my laptop, so I know exactly where it is. But if you're using something on your laptop or on a tablet or something like that, a really good idea is to take a little sticker and stick it right next to where your camera is, so you don't have to look for it. So whenever someone's taking a picture of me with a mobile phone, I never know where to look, because I don't know where the camera is on the phone. It all just looks like a box that they're holding up to me. And when I look at my pictures, you can see that I'm not looking directly into the lens there. So putting a little sticker where your camera is allows you every now and again to look up and look at that sticker, specifically when you feel that this is a time in a session that I might want to look the client in the eye, to show that I'm really here with them and I'm really attentive to what they're saying at the moment. That's a little bit on cameras. You've said, Rory, that you kind of want to be thinking about the headphones that best suit you. And what I do want to say is that the technology is now available and works really well to have headphones that have a built-in microphone as well. In the more expensive or the higher end brands, they're used in telesales. I guess that's what they're for. They're for comfort, for people to listen and talk professionally. And it carries a good representation of your voice, and you'll be able to hear really, really well. So you can play around with those and try out. I think that if I was working online and my headphones were hidden, in the first session, I would be saying that I was using headphones. I would show them to the client, and I would say why I was using them. And again, I would be linking that into confidentiality. The last thing I want is to be in a room in my home with sound coming out of the speakers of my PC or my system that I'm using that may be able to be overheard outside of the room. I don't want that. The client doesn't want that. And I don't want them thinking that, or even it being a consideration for them. Specifically, let's say you're in a session, you're online, and then suddenly your dog barks outside of the room and the client can hear it. And they go, "Oh, I just heard the dog bark outside of the room." If I can hear outside the room, maybe people outside the room can hear what I'm talking about. So for that reason, headphones, telling them why the headphones are there and why they're used, I think is reassuring, and it shows that you are holding that confidentiality well. And I think, so we've looked very briefly at headphones, we've looked very briefly at a camera and looking into that camera. And I think what is also important is, what is your background? What does that look like? And I know that there is a great tendency to use a blurred background now, or a virtual background. Now, if I met up with somebody online, and I have, and their background was the Northern Lights, I would suspect it wasn't real. I don't know.
Or Pluto.
But what it is, Rory, I think that we're talking about being genuine, being authentic. And I don't know, for me, I just think using a background that is very obviously a virtual fake background that is trying to be something, a beach with palm trees, northern lights, anything like that, could be distracting. And I put this to you. Try this. If you do use a virtual background, record yourself. Go on, record yourself with your virtual background, and then use your hands to do a little bit of hand movement, or lift something up into your frame, and you'll see that it glitches. And it glitches because the technology is trying to put the background where the background should be and put you where you should be, and it's not foolproof, and it can be really disconcerting. And think about anytime you've been on a meeting online where someone has used a background, and every now and again the background goes and you see what's behind them, and then you don't see what's behind them. For me, I think if you think about your background, it only takes up your screen. That's it. Your background doesn't have to be massive, doesn't have to be super fancy. You can be in the corner of a room, and I think at the very most maybe blur the background. But my own personal feelings is to keep away from the obvious fake palm trees and a beach.
I agree, Ken. And I could tell you a humorous story about meeting with a colleague many years ago who had a blurred background. And every time she moved, before the background caught up with her head, I could see something that was clearly on the fridge with some writing. And I spent most of my time trying to guess what was written on her fridge, to the point where I became very, very less present. And I was thinking, well, what's that there? Some writing, and maybe it's my neurodivergent brain, but I had to work really hard at staying present and not kind of focusing on what was being hidden by the blur. So I think a background is useful, and I think a constant background as well.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I don't think we discuss enough in therapy is the fact that when clients come to you, they might come to the same room. You know, there's something about consistency. Therapists should be consistent. And I also think the environment they practice in should be consistent. I know when I hired rooms and one wasn't available, I would say to my client, "We're having to use another room today. How are you with that?"
Yeah.
Just as a courtesy. And it might be, a client may say, I'm not saying they did, but what I'm saying they may say, well, if it might feel a bit uncomfortable, I'd say, okay, well, let's just see and try and just see how it is. And usually, it was forgotten in the moment. But I think that's important, to have a consistency. If you're turning up sat on Pluto one day And then the next day you sat at the Northern Lights. And then when they turn up again, you sat on the cruise ship. I think it just kind of is a bit confusing. And don't underestimate the stability that the room brings. I once read a beautiful part in a book, and it said the room has to give the client permission to cry. Never forget that. Many years ago, I can't remember which book it was in, but I think in every level of our work, we incite permission for people to be themselves, to talk about themselves, to show emotion, and I think the environment we practice in also should invoke that too.
Oh, 100%. That we can really go deep into this, and I know we do in our formal training, but the same applies for your client as well. You meet up with the client, it is really good practice to speak with them in your introductory session before you start getting into the work that you're going to be doing together, about their background too. And the reason I say that is that client may turn up, they're there for their therapy, they're engaging in the therapy, and then they suddenly see themselves, and then they suddenly see their background and think, oh, I should have put that washing away. Oh, I shouldn't have had that maiden with the washing near that window over there, and then no longer engaged with you in that session. So we would speak with our client in that very first introductory session about their confidentiality, about their safe place, about their headphones that they may use so that your voice is in their ears only as well. So there's so much to take into consideration. It's interesting. When online and telephone counselling went from being a niche sector in counselling and psychotherapy to needing to go online because we were kind of COVID came along and we were not able to see people in the room, there was a thinking of, well, you know what, I've trained as a counsellor, I know my stuff, I've done, I don't know, 1,000 hours, I'm just going to go online and do exactly the same thing. We cannot underestimate how much of a part the technology is actually plays in this. And I think it needs some consideration in the same way. I'm going to share, Rory, when I went into my first placement, it was in a medical practice, in a GP practice. And they practically gave me a broom cupboard. It wasn't a broom cupboard. It was a little room that they weren't using, but it was full of all the old chairs, and it was horrible. And I went in, and I thought, I can't bring a client into this. And I spent time, and I went into supervision, and I asked my supervisor what I could do, and together we made a plan, and I bought a little rug, and I brought a little clocks to put on the wall, and some personalizing little touches to make it feel respectful to that client. And I think we need to ask that same question. Is our online therapy just a broom cupboard in a corner, or have we thought about how that technology plays a part in the relationship with that client? We've got a super duper handout for this that Rory has put together. And you can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 363. It's today's episode, and you can download that. Of course, if you're interested in our online telephone training course, just go to counsellingtutor.com. It's there under our training. And I've got some really good news. Some time ago, when I moved to North Wales, I had no place that I could sit and be professional online. So I went through a number of iterations of building those, and we filmed the process of how we took a broken down room full of dust and dirt that was falling apart and turned it into what would be classed as a respectful therapy room with good lighting, good sound, good camera. And we are bringing that to our online and telephone counselling course within 2026. Give us a month or two just to get that sorted, but we're going to be adding it to that course to strengthen it up again as well. And we're also going to be including our kit list, in the full list of kit that Rory uses, that I use, that our team uses for our online working. Any final thoughts as we back out of technology and online working, Rory?
Yeah, I think that working online is a little bit like starting again, really. And one of the, that reminded me when I started to work online of going back to college, really, because it was quite a new environment. And I took a lot of time with peers and speaking with peers and trying out my equipment and how does this look and how does that lighting look. So I would say that if you are, venturing into the online world, take some time just to test out your setup with peers before you go live with clients. Get some feedback, get some peer review, because and get accurate peer review. Not, your plant pot looks nice or that type of thing, but can you hear me? Is it stable? Can I hear you? What's the lighting look like? And also, maybe I think if I'd have continued in practice, I would have put a picture of me in my online working environment, maybe with the headphones I used, and maybe with the background I used on my website or listing. So people, when they met me, could see exactly what they were going to get. It wasn't going to be unknown. They would see Rory as he was when working online. And, I think that with online working, it's brought great opportunities. But I think that we need to put as much effort into our online presence through technology or our backgrounds or our cameras or our lighting as we would in those lovely therapy rooms, which we see pictured so often on our Facebook page.
Thank you, Rory. Great topic. It's interesting. If you haven't watched the podcast on YouTube, go and have a look. Go to YouTube, put in Counselling Tutor and find one of our clips and go and have a look at Rory. And you'll see he's wearing his headphones. And I've come to know Rory with those headphones on, because every time I see you got those headphones on, you are Rory when you're wearing those headphones. And what's really interesting, a couple of years back when we had our year-end get-together in Counselling Tutor, we brought the whole team together from all over the world. We got together and we had some caricatures drawn up by a professional caricature artist of each team member, just, to make everyone feel special for their part that they play in Counselling Tutor. And yours, Rory, is you with your headphones on, because that's how we always see you, because we work online.
Yeah, it's true. That's it. Every time anybody sees me online, I've got a pair of headphones that look like I'm in some kind of recording studio, which I guess I am. Really.
Yeah, but it goes back to it is consistent. It is consistently so. Yes. I like that. Thank you very much for that topic. What a great topic to start us off with, and that is our ethical, sustainable practice. We now move into Practice Matters. This is where we bring you the experts. This is the CPD section, where an expert in their specific field or sector within counselling or psychotherapy speaks with Rory. Very often they make lectures for our CPD library, these experts. And today's topic is one that I think comes up quite often. It's around alcohol, problem drinking, and recovery pathways. You met up and spoke with Caroline, Rory.
I did. Caroline Evers-Endacott, as I said at the top of the podcast, is a real expert in addiction and recovery working. She works at the Priory, and she's made 4 lectures on working with addiction. The latest lecture, Alcohol, Problem, Drinking and Recovery Pathways, is the lecture we're discussing in this interview. And when I caught up with her, this is what she had to say about it. It's my great pleasure to welcome back Caroline Evers-Endacott, who has produced a comprehensive series of lectures for the Counsellor CPD Library on the subject of working with addiction, which includes titles such as Working with Addiction, Relapse and Prevention, Trauma and Addiction, and her latest lecture, Alcohol, Problem Drinking and Recovery Pathways. So Caroline, it's wonderful to have you back. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Happy being here. Good to see you again.
Yes. And the first thing that I think kind of struck me in your lecture was that you move away from the idea that abstinence is the only valid outcome. So for counsellors listening who may have been trained in abstinence-based thinking, how can we begin to understand recovery as a spectrum while still holding risk and safety in mind?
Yeah, so I guess as a profession, we've been somewhat infused with the abstinence goal over years, and of course there's various community-based organizations as well where abstinence is key. And one might argue, as a general, if we all didn't drink anything, then life would probably be much better. But of course, that's not realistic. So we need to talk about being realistic, but also, for us as counsellors, being client-led and client-led, and being working with the client's goals. Research shows that when we work with clients' goals, the outcomes are most probable being more productive and more longer lasting as well. So it's also getting away from one's own agenda, possibly. That's again, that's a typical topic in therapy and counselling, right? We might have our own ideas over what people should or shouldn't consume or how much, and or do, therefore, right? If we talk addiction, we're not only talking about substances, but also behaviors, but we're talking about alcohol recovery in particular. So, taking our own agendas out of the room and really going with what the client is leading with and how that will work for them, and how we can make that work not only in therapy, but also in their life in general.
Yeah, so
keeping an open mind, I guess, is what we're saying, right?
Absolutely, and not thinking kind of in one particular direction. So you talk about mentioning, or you mentioned working with a client's goals. So is that something we would do, a therapist would do, when a client said, I've got an addiction issue, I want to change? Mm-hmm. How would that approach start? What would be a good approach for a therapist to take?
So open the discussion up with. I always open the discussion up with, and obviously we start with, as with anything, we start with an assessment of the client, what they're bringing as a whole background, how long, but particularly when I've got an addiction or I've got an alcohol addiction, you want to look at how long that has been the case, what the severity looks like, in terms of not only how much they're drinking, which is one measure. We're bringing in measures, how many units they're drinking, how often they're drinking, how they're drinking, whether or not it's binge drinking. And we're also, bringing in measures, for example, the audit, which looks at consequences in the broader life, in whether or not other people have maybe advised them to you should drink less, but also so looking at the breadth of what this client is bringing, the severity, but also looking at measures of or bringing in educational pieces over the units that you're drinking. Binge drinking, for example, starts at 6 units for women and 8 units for men. That's not known. People have no idea that that's when they start binge drinking. So, to your question, what do we do? Well, we take a broad assessment, of course, as well as specific around the alcohol or the substance. And what else is present, right? Is there neurodivergence? Is there comorbidity with anxiety, depression, and so on? And really looking from there what might be possible for the client to approach in terms of to keeping them safe and of course safety of those around him, her, and them. So we're looking, and then the assessment goes a little bit maybe more into risk assessment. What's their what's their workplace like? What's their work safety like? What's their travel safety like? What's their family situation like? So you kind of need to, obviously take a holistic assessment and see where safety needs to play into it, and whether or not a harm reductive measure, which, for example, non-abstinence, therefore reduction, taking breaks, and moderating, comes into place. We're talking really about an assessment for harm reduction.
Yeah, so we're not there to police clients, are we? And to tell them how to live the life. And is it true? I've often heard this from colleagues in recovery services that someone's addicted to alcohol. Mm-hmm. Actually stopping drinking on the spot can actually have its own dangers.
Yes, of course. So that's what we're also looking at, and there we might also, as counsellors, we might also need to bring, for example, bring multiple agencies in, for example, the GP, because we might not be able to assess whether or not somebody's physically dependent. So what you're referring to is physical dependence on alcohol. Can be, when suddenly stopping can be dangerous in terms of potential seizures, and seizures can be fatal. So just suddenly cutting out alcohol where somebody's either frequently or heavily drinking can be dangerous. So something like that needs to be well measured and well monitored, and potentially with medical input as well. So seizures don't come in, and the withdrawal symptoms aren't either dangerous or debilitating. So that's what I'm saying. So, as a counsellor, I'm not a GP. I cannot assess that, but I can have a view on it from the measures that I can take. And then we might need to bring in their general practitioners or psychiatrists or other agencies to manage those risks. And also on the tapering, talking of moderation, like you say, we can't tell the clients how to live their life, but also as counsellors, we are not alcohol practitioners per se. We come alongside them on their journey, but how to taper and how much to taper to really come from the medical profession or specific alcohol services. So that's where the multi-agency approach comes in from as well. When a client is held by more than one person as well in what they're experiencing.
Yes, and I guess there might be some people listening to this, they're thinking, doesn't sound like the counselling I practice multi-agencies, having an understanding of alcohol addiction, creating a kind of a discovery piece to discover how much the client's drinking, how it affects them, how to manage risk, and indeed with that confidentiality. What would you say to the person listening who might say, well, I'm not sure that I'm fully trained to do that. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with doing that.
Yeah, and this is where the series came from, right? In the first place, so practitioners therapists might go, I don't know anything about addiction. I don't even know where to start. And I guess that's a good pivotal point of, do you feel confident working with that? If you have a doubt about it, speak to your supervisor, obviously. But if you think like, no, I can work with them, there's of course practices and modalities that you can bring in order to work with somebody with addiction, even if you're not trained specifically as an addictions therapist. But you can also bring, colleagues, ask colleagues, or with your supervisor's advice, how to maybe take those, the safety measures into your assessment to add on to your usual assessment. But what I would also say is, so to the person who's listening and says, oh, no, I won't touch, won't touch addiction. So you will undoubtedly come across somebody, even if they don't present with addiction in the first place, you will more likely than not come across somebody in your practice who say they come with anxiety, and further down the line, they either say, do you know what, I think I'm drinking too much, or I've got a problem with whatever, drugs or other behaviors. And or somebody has been in recovery and has just relapsed, and that wouldn't necessarily have, they may not have said that in the first place, because they only need to come to grow, to trust you as their counsellor, so as your therapist, in order for them to disclose that, or something's changed in their life. So it's not immediately presenting, because let's remember, right, addiction comes with huge stigma, with huge shame, and often, but also obviously with pride and success and so on, recovery. But people might disclose that later in your work together. And at that point, you will have undoubtedly gained the client's trust, having somebody feeling that the holding and the benefit of the therapy and the trust within the room with you, that you might actually be the best placed person for them to work on what they've just been disclosing to you and hadn't been able to just because they needed to, and the history, because that's also part of it, right? The understanding is already there. So I would say to people, yes, if you don't feel that you can, have a conversation with somebody, obviously a conversation with your supervisor, but really assess maybe the client's best interest, while it's not putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Obviously, we all need to work within our competencies. But some people might say, oh, that's a specialist areas, I can't do that, refer. But that might not be the case always.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's a case of working what the client wants, understanding that abstinence isn't the only route, and also about taking advice or taking supervision to help the client. Because if a client asks for help, then, as counsellors, I'm guessing that we can do what we can do. We can offer what we know within our skill set. One of the things that really struck me about your presentation, you speak really powerful about alcohol as a culturally normalised drug. Yeah. And how do you see social norms, maybe class, gender, shaping the way clients relate to alcohol and the shame they may carry in the therapy room from that?
Yeah. And that in itself, that question, right, is I guess we have to ask ourselves, maybe as therapists, we have to ask ourselves in the first place, what's my relationship with alcohol, my history with alcohol? How do I, or in reverse, how do I view somebody who might have a problem, who is drinking too much? What's my own experience, of course? So we're bringing in our own, awareness, but also then open up the discussion. And that's, it's already a big piece to work on with somebody of, what is your experience of, how did you get to drink? What's your, how are you seen the way you're drinking? Are you judged by those around you, or are you tracked by those around you in terms of your drinking? Do you find that you can't get out of maybe a whole, friends and a family circle that are big drinkers? This a historical background in your family. We're all big drinkers, and that's what we are. An identity already there, right? And that's really hard to escape, or even to shift, or let alone change. So, and yes, our cultural norms, expectations, alcohol is our culture, this country in particular, and there's maybe regional differences, but as a whole, alcohol comes in everywhere for celebrations, for funerals, for birthdays, for New Year's, for Tuesday night, and whatever it is, in the workplace. I've had a discussion with somebody recently about the workplace. In COVID, there was a workplace who sent their people cocktail mixtures to have a toast on a frequent basis, where you need to ask yourself is what kind of, yes, you want to keep your people together and motivated. Is that the right way of doing it? Of looking after your employees by inebriating them, if you like? But, I'm laughing and we're chuckling off that. But that's the culture that we're in. That said, I've also, I think I mentioned it in the lecture as well, there's a shift, of course, at the moment. There's a huge, certainly since I trained as well, there's a huge shift in terms of, when we talk about sober movement, sober curious, there's a raft of books and podcasts and also on that talk openly about, of course, celebrities, but also the everyday man who has struggled, or who has, overcome, or who has learned from or changed, with their relation with alcohol. So there's a shift in view. I believe, this is anecdotally as well as we know, not only anecdotally, but also statistically, young people don't drink as much as maybe Rory, you and I did in our past, or our generation, right? So the young people don't. There might be other stuff going on, but the drinking isn't as infused as it has. So there's certainly something different, but it's still very much a norm rather than not. And there's a way to go still that simply, alcohol just comes off the menu and becomes an exception. From my point of view, it becomes an exception more than the norm. But we have to be aware of what pressures people are under, what they've experienced, where they see themselves, how they see themselves, and what history they bring, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting topic for me. I to be completely transparent, I stopped drinking alcohol completely in 2011. And for me, it was easy. I just didn't drink it anymore. And I understand that for some people that would have been a real struggle. I just stopped. But what amuses me is the amount of times when I go out socially and someone says, what are you drinking? And I'll say, I'll have a Diet Pop, Coke, or I'll have a non-alcoholic beer. And they say, don't you drink? And I'll say, no, I don't drink alcohol. And they'll say, why not? And I find myself, and I don't think this is unusual, kind of justifying. And someone actually said to me, they kind of sidled up to me and they said, were you an alcoholic, Rory? And it's like, well, I don't think I was, because I stopped immediately. So I had no cravings for it. And I said, even if I was, I've stopped. And it was almost like, you are not part of the norm. You are very different.
Yes. You are other.
Yeah, yes. I got othered, to use a modern term.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I find that quite an interesting thing, because alcohol is a very addictive substance to some people. It can be very addictive to some people. And I did read, I don't know if you've read Professor Nutt's book,
sure,
Drugs Without All the Hot Air. He said that if they were to make it now, it would be classified as a drug.
Yeah, and he also says, right, it wouldn't be admissible as a for human consumption sort of thing. I think I might be misquoting him there. He also said, the only measure we should drink in order not to have any risk whatsoever connected with alcohol is 1 glass of wine a year. So, but you're saying it's an addictive substance. It's a toxin. Yes. That we voluntarily go out and purchase and put in our bodies. And nobody bats an eyelid. In fact, they're going to challenge you. It's like, hey, why are you not drinking? Is there something wrong with you, inverted commas? So, yeah, I'm still, there's this huge stigma in exactly what you're saying. Like, well, if you don't drink, you must be something that we put a label on. Let's call it alcoholic or problem drinker or whatever. The acceptability isn't there yet, which is what I was referring earlier to. There's a way to go yet to make that alcohol the exception as opposed to the norm. So the norm is not drinking, or it's perfectly acceptable. So yes, and that's the problem here as well with alcohol. There is still, and people that come into clinic, right, there is still even the saying, which is why I'm also saying to those who are listening and saying their clients are, disclosing, it takes huge courage to say so. I think I've got a problem, or I am dependent, or I am an alcoholic, or whatever you want to call yourself. That takes guts because of all the stigma that goes around it. What if they think I am? Even if they think my neighbors, my friends, my family might think I am, then I'm already something totally different to them. It's this othering, this separation, which is, of course, the big discussion there in the addictions field over the continuum or the binary. You're either an alcoholic or you're not, and there's no leeway. No, it's a sequence of severity, or question of severity, in fact. And to cutting people off and putting a label on them ain't going to do anybody any good, and certainly not in the therapy group, of course.
Yes, and one of the things, it's a very strong theme through your lecture, is the impacts of stigma and moral judgment. What should we as counsellors be particularly mindful in terms of language when a client begins to talk about maybe problem drinking, and especially the fear of labels or diagnosis?
Yeah. So language counts a lot. So I guess we're following almost the client's language. So just flipping this for a moment as well, while I was talking about continuum, some people call themselves alcoholic, and that's what they want to refer themselves as, or I'm in recovery, or I'm a recovering alcoholic, and that is obviously that's fine how they want to refer to themselves. So it's almost taken a little bit of a lead there as well, but putting a label on somebody's is tricky, obviously, or kind of a huge shaming effect. And like I said, addiction comes with a lot of shame. So being mindful of the language. So it's, we're talking about the problems and the consequences and the self-perceptions and talking more around what goes on for them, as opposed to saying you are and you have and you don't or whatever. So it's been, as we would I guess with any presentation, if we talk about depression or we talk about neurodivergence, we're talking about people who are living with ADHD, people who are experiencing an episode of depression. So being approachable and soft in their language, and finding, and also maybe have an open discussion with the client of how they would like to refer to themselves as or speak about the topic. So it's digestible.
Yes.
But also taken seriously, huh?
Yeah, you're meeting the client where they are. And just for the record, I have no objection to anybody drinking alcohol. I regularly go out with friends who drink. I just choose not to. And I don't give people lectures or tell them, my view on it. If they're all adults, if they want to drink, that's fine. And I'm quite happy sat with my soft drink or my alcohol-free beer, which I quite like now. I'm quite a connoisseur of alcohol-free beer. It's very, very nice. Now, when it comes to the limits of our competence, you're very, very clear that a referral doesn't mean abandoning the client. Mm-hmm. So how do counsellors recognise the limits of their competence, refer appropriately, and still remain a consistent and supportive presence in the client's sort of recovery journey?
Yeah, that's remaining working alongside the client. So that's, again, being open with the client over your competency, saying, look, this is not my field. However, what we can do, and this also goes back to the counsellor of maybe informing them when somebody comes with this, maybe informing themselves of what's around them, and then talking through the process with the client of what we suggest to happen. I can't advise on, if you are the counsellor, I can't advise you on tapering. I can't advise you whether or not you're dependent. I can't advise you on that's outside my competency and my comfort and competency. But where we are together in this is like, you say, self-referral, helping them with a referral, possibly self-referral or with a referral to their GP, and still remain, therapy can continue even if you refer on to specialist services. In fact, it's a really good back holding for the client to be with somebody who knows them very well, or hopefully, or who holds the other side of, okay, I'm taking action of reducing or cutting or going into detox, but working with the psychological impact of that, and also the change in that. So it's a huge role of being alongside, whilst nowhere near needing to be a specialist on alcohol, but being that calm, holding presence for the client to be able to reflect, for them to be experiencing them in something very challenging, in something very, new, obviously, but also a life-changing event that will come with its peaks and troughs as well, obviously.
Well, perhaps that's a good place to end. Working with Addiction, a series of lectures, is available in the Counsellor CPD library now. It just remains for me to say, Caroline Evers-Endacott, thank you for joining us.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com. Massive thank you to Caroline. Massive thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all important conversations, and a topic that is very dear to my heart. It was my first work was in recovery services. I know that it's that information is well needed and definitely of service. And as we move out of Practice Matters, we go straight head first today, I'm telling you, into our student services. And we're speaking about navigating a long gap between counselling training levels. I think, Rory, can you just explain why there is sometimes a gap? Because somebody might think, well, why doesn't the introduction to counselling level 2 end and then the level 3 start? But there are reasons, aren't there?
Well, there are. I mean, it can do. I mean, there are some training providers that do back-to-back training. You can literally walk in and take a couple of weeks break between each of them. Private providers sometimes do that, but the traditional way is that you do, maybe in 1 year you will do an introduction, and then in the second year you'll do a certificate, and in the third year you may go on to do either a diploma or a degree, depending on the pathway you want to take. And what can happen is that somebody they may do the introduction, they may do the certificate, which is a counselling skills course, really, give you some counselling skills. And then what might happen is that people's lives get in the way. Families may come along, or they may move, or their careers take a different path, and they may have a gap between training. And then at some point they think, I'd love to do the diploma, I'd love to become a diploma or a degree and become qualified. And that's what we're really discussing today. What are the pros and cons, really, of taking a long gap between counselling training? And I think one of the pros is that it gives you a chance, really, to think if you really want to do it. I think a lot of people may just get pulled along in the excitement and go on to the next course. And, as a tutor, we had to be very thoughtful and mindful that people really understood what they were getting into, because the move from certificate to, diploma, we taught, is a huge learning curve, a huge jump. There's so many moving parts in it. You have to get a placement. You're required to have your own therapy. You have to turn up to all the lessons. You have to write assignments, and at the end you have to do some form of exam to pass. It's quite a lot of intense work, and I think that taking a break can think, do I really want to do it? And I know some people took a break and thought, no, I think the journey ends here. I'm going to take my little skills set, my counselling skills, and apply it to the work I'm going to do. And they go off, and that's fantastic. But for some people, they may think, I'd like to take it up again 2 years, maybe after I've done my certificate. And I guess the challenge there is that, I'm a great believer in use it or lose it. I think skills are quite, you have quite intense and quite tricky to master. And if you don't use them, you lose them. Simple as that. You get a bit rusty. And I think it's one of the issues of taking a long break is you come back, all your peers are really fresh. They've come out of training recently. Their skills are on point, and it may be that you struggle to keep up, and that might make you feel just a little bit left behind. So I think it's about being realistic about how much that gap has, how much you've lost in that gap. And I know I've just gone back to something I do that I did regularly a few years ago, and I had to really put my mind to relearning it again, because I just forgotten how to do it. Some of the things I've forgotten how to do, Ken.
Yeah, fully understandable, Rory. And sometimes it's not a choice, this break. Your choice may be, I'm doing this. I'm going to become a counselor. I want to be a psychotherapist. Whatever your journey is. And you may get to a point where they go, right, that's the end of this part of the course, and the next one starts in 9 months, and that's the way it is. Other options are go and find another learning provider that staggers their course, starts differently. And I know many students have said that they have done that. That they all come with pros and cons. One of the cons there is, but I won't be with the same group that I did my first part with. And we could debate that. There's pluses and minuses on both sides.
Yes.
But I guess I like what you said, Rory, is it can be used as a time of reflection of, is this really for me? I certainly know this. When I walked into my first lesson in counselling, I had a romanticized idea of what a counsellor was. It was the idea that I had in my head. And 10 weeks later, I knew that wasn't true. I knew counselling was actually something very different. I was fully expecting that the lessons were going to be, right, when a person says this is what you want to tell them back. And when they say they're struggling with this, the advice you give them then is this advice. So to hear in session one of, it's not about giving advice, was like, well, then what is it then? And I learned a lot in the beginning that gave me enough information to decide whether this was really for me. And I did have a gap. I did have a gap in my training. I think it was about 3 or 4 months. And I did use that gap to really consider, is this something I really want to do? Because I now had more access to the topic, to the people and peers within that topic. I could speak to others that were on the course that I was looking to go on and get their feedback. And they were feeding back pretty much what you were saying there, Rory, of, this is not... this is something to be taken very seriously. It is a heavy commitment in time and resources. And I think I was in a better place to weigh up whether it was for me. But once you've made the decision and said, you know what, this is for me, I'm doing this, how might we use that gap? If it's a forced gap, Rory, we've now got 6 months that we have to wait for our next course. We don't want to become stale. Is there anything we can do that is going to kind of give us at least one toe that we keep within this topic so that we don't go back in again and start from stale?
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, counselling is a kind of double offering. It's theory and practice, isn't it? And I think that nowadays there's so many interesting YouTube channels. The Counselling Tutor YouTube channel, I have to say, is very interesting for keeping up with, and the podcast is really interesting for keeping up. And I think just touching base with the theories. I mean, I know I've spoken to people who've listened to the podcast in a gap, and it's really kind of kept their enthusiasm alight, and also given them things to think about. In the absence of being taught, it's given them things to think about and investigate and go online and have a look. And I think that's the theory side, or the more technical side. In terms of practice, if for some reason you can't commit to the course in the year after you've taken your certificate in counselling skills, maybe do some volunteering, or think about how you use that communication, because counselling skills is really advanced communication techniques. It's listening and communication techniques. I think how you can apply those in your work. I know lots of people, certainly myself, when I left my skills course, even through my skills course, I applied a lot of what I'd learned in the work I was doing. I was in sales, and I applied a lot of listening a bit more harder, being less judgmental, being clearer in what I said, reflecting back. All these are communication skills. They can be used in any environment. If you're working with people, you can use them, but it's consciously using them, Ken. Setting out and thinking, coming away and thinking, I use this, I use that, and this is what happened. So you can keep yourself up to date on theory, and you can keep yourself keep your skills alive by using them in the work you do, or maybe some volunteering. And I think there's some merit in taking a bit of time, because you can practice them. You can practice them and say to yourself, "Oh, well, that was interesting. I did this, and this is what happened." Think of yourself as a little scientist, if you like. I use this counselling skill, and this is how things progressed, and this is what happened. I think there's some merit in practicing your skills, and keeping up.
Yeah.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Yeah, it's interesting. The word skills is interesting. So we speak all the time about counselling skills, and if you're a student of counselling, you can know exactly what we mean. It's the actual how you react within the session, your active listening, how you might respond, and the theory sits, I guess, alongside that. It is supported by the theory of the skills and the skills themselves. But the skills are interchangeable, as you say, Rory. Many people start studying counselling, and then take those skills and use them in teaching or nursing or in HR or in any part of the job. There is no doubt that those skills are incredibly powerful, incredibly valuable, and dare I say, incredibly rare in everyday life, because generally when somebody's speaking to somebody else, the other person's thinking about what they're going to say next. They're not really listening actively.
Yeah.
So there is a great opportunity to practice those skills. Before we go to skills, I just want to speak about the theory section. Let's say you got 6 months and you're definitely doing the next level of this course, but it only runs in 6 months' time. Well, find out what the recommended reading list is for that course.
Yeah.
Get the books, or go have a look at the theories, go and read about them. Go in with a foundation of knowledge that you can. The theory, you can look at. The theory is the theory. You know, it's written by the theorists in books that the college, university that you're training at, private provider, are going to say, read these books. If you get those books and read them, doesn't matter if you don't fully understand what they're saying, just let the material wash over you. In the same way as you were saying, Rory, you know, we put this podcast out weekly during academic term time here in the UK. There's always new, fresh content coming at you and just washing over you. So you stay within the content, I guess. So you keep it washing over you. It can keep things a little bit fresher. When it comes to skills, it's a little harder. Like you say, Rory, because skills, we generally will be taught the theory of the skill, and then we're going to work with peers and practice those skills. We're going to be observed on those skills. Feedback is going to be given on those skills. So a little bit more difficult to practice them on your own, however, not impossible. And one of the places where it is made possible is in our student library. So we have a CPD section, which is qualified therapists only, which is kind of continuing professional development brought by experts. But we also have a student library. And within that student library, there's a massive theory section where all the base theories are covered. But there's also a very large skills section where the skills are explained, demonstrated, shown. And I often see, Rory, students in our Facebook group, Counselling Tutor Facebook group, saying, hey, you know what? I'd like to meet up with a peer online and practice some counselling skills.
Yeah.
And there's always a healthy response. Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a wonderful way of doing it. A couple of peers getting together and just practicing the skills and trying them out. Don't worry about getting them right. Just worry about practicing them and getting used to them. When you are under a tutor and being observed, they will definitely fine-tune that for you. But it's a great way of just keeping fresh on those skills. I think also looking on YouTube at the Gloria tapes, so you can watch maybe Carl Rogers doing some counselling. I did this during my break and I loved it. You know, I'd watch what the client says, and then I would what Gloria was saying in these cases, and then I'd pause and I'd think, what would I say here? What would I do here? And then I'd press play and hear Carl Rogers say something completely different to what I would have said, and go, okay, well he's the man, so we'll kind of learn from that. But you can learn from watching others use skills as well. A little peek of something to come shortly, if you're listening in real time. Counselling Skills Academy, who have been a sponsor of this podcast for a couple of years now, which is basically skills, peer skills session, and a deep dive into skills, is merging into our student resource. So that's coming soon. And that gives an opportunity to work in a constructive way around skills with peer practice within a community. So lots of excitement on that front.
Yeah, it's really exciting, isn't it? Yeah, and I'd also say, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, you know, I've got a job where I don't really use counselling skills, it's not appropriate to use counselling skills. Let me frame it for you in this way. There's a big difference in listening to respond than there is to listening to understand. And I've looked at business leaders throughout the spectrum of business, and most of the enlightened ones have said that, you know, listening to someone is listening to understand, not to respond. And if you think about it, I think a lot of people, or some people, should we say, some people, when you say something, they're looking for it, they respond. In other words, they come from a defensive place sometimes, as opposed to try and genuinely listen to understand what's happening, what's going on, and really seeing the person in front of them. And I think that, in any industry where you're working with people and building relationships, you could, I don't know, you could be in sales, you could be, working on a bus, there's hundreds of jobs where people are people facing. Listening to understand, I think, is where counselling skills come in. You don't have to counsel people, but you can adapt them to help someone feel understood. And when someone feels understood, they're more likely to be open to what you have to say to them. So I think that's a really good position to take. Really is. It works for me, definitely.
Yeah, very, very much so. And one of the greatest gifts of my counselling training, I guess, looking back, I'm autistic, neurodivergent. Most of my life, I didn't know that. But one of my biggest fears was being in a small talk situation where there's another person and you've got to speak to them or listen to them. And I never knew what to say. I used to have this horrible feeling inside when in small talk situations with people I didn't know very well. And they'd speak to me and I'd be thinking, what are you supposed to say here? What's the right response? How do you reply? So I was always listening to just respond and wondering what I should say and what was the right thing to do. When I learned the counselling skills, I thought, I don't have to do that anymore. No. I can actually just genuinely listen to these people. And, I think the thing for me, Rory, was realizing that counselling skills are not about what you say. They're just not. No, counselling skills are not what you say. It's how you respond when the client says or when they go somewhere. And I found it liberating. I use them to this day. And I use, I guess, the skills I learned in counselling training in most of my interactions, specifically with new people I don't know. I'm just able to turn off that little voice in me that wants to say the right thing back. And I think, who is this person? Can I really listen to this person? And maybe my empathy's turned down a little bit, and my unconditional positive regard, we've spoken about them as being like little dials that you can turn down, and you turn them up when you're in session, because this is therapy now. When I'm speaking to somebody having small talk, it's not therapy. But the skills, you can still use the skills. So I'm so grateful to the skills, because they have brought for me a peace of mind. I can now be in a conversation with somebody I don't know, and I know I don't need to know what to say. I just need to be there while they say what they want to say. Yeah.
Absolutely, Ken. There's one final piece to this. If you have been out of education for a time because, events have happened where you couldn't follow on to the next course, if you kind of log all the things that you've been doing, and how you've used the education in your skills course in your work, or what you've been doing externally to keep informed about the world of counselling. When you go for that interview for the next level and your tutor says, well, it's been 3 years since you've done your skills course, you can then with confidence say, well, look, I've applied this learning here. I'm keeping up to date by listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. There is other education available, I have to say. I've been keeping up. You could even go as far, if you're really switched on, to work out which awarding body the new course is overseen by, and download the specification, because that has the questions in it. And you could have a look at some of the questions and talk about, well, I've had a look at this question, and I would answer this in such and such a way. And what you're doing is you're demonstrating that, although you've been out of education, you've immersed yourself into the world of counselling. And I don't know about you, Ken, but I like the idea of teaching someone who's immersed in the work. Immersed. My word du jour, immersed. In the work.
Rory.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we've been immersed, I guess, in episode 363 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and we're grateful that you joined us for a listen.
Indeed. I'll just come up for air. And we started off with ethical and sustainable practice, and we talked about using the right online tech, thinking about making your online therapy room as inviting and as functional as your corporeal therapy room, the therapy room where you might meet people face to face. We went straight into practice matters and we talked with Caroline Evers-Endacott, who is an addiction specialist, addiction recovery specialist, and she talked about the lecture in the Counsellor CPD library, one of 4 lectures she's recorded for us on alcohol, problem drinking and recovery pathways. Fab lecture, and certainly one I think that people should watch to be informed. The whole lecture series, I think, would inform people on the world of addiction and the world of recovery. And then straight into student services, where we did a deep dive into navigating a long gap between counselling training levels. It just goes for me to say thank you so much for your likes, shares and subscribes, especially your comments for those who watch on the YouTube channel, Counselling Tutor on YouTube. You can see clips of our podcast there. And as always, and until the next time we meet, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.